Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. We're delighted today to be joined by Glen Cousquer. He's lecturer and coordinator of the MSc and Masters of Veterinary Science programs in One Health and Conservation Medicine at the University of Edinburgh. He's also the recipient of Social Responsibility and Sustainability Changemaker Award. He's writer, photographer, is an international mountain leader and a veterinary surgeon who actively uses narrative and photography to help individuals, communities, and organizations understand, explore, and reimagine their relationship with animals and the environment. His work's about connection and systems thinking, and also empathy. He's a member of the philanthropic agency, the photography agency that I set up, and Photo Aid Global. All in all, he's a good man. He's making a difference. So, Glen, I really appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you very much, Ness, and it's wonderful to be with you. And thank you for that very glowing introduction. I think the one thing I probably want to say right from the start is, all of those things are probably figured in my journey. I don't pretend to be all of them at once. So it's part of having a confused and very varied identity, I guess. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Having a varied identity is very good. It makes you achieve the things you have done. But leading on from that, then, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Glen. You have got an interesting background. Can you tell us about your sort of journey to where you are now and what you're doing now? That'd be great.
Yes, I think all of us have journeys, and we all sort of struggle to make sense of them sometimes. And sometimes it's about doors opening and pursuing a particular ambition or interest or even just a set of values. And I think in my own case, having grown up with a very deep connection to the natural world and to wildlife, I was drawn to working with animals. And when you're an academic person, or quite good academic, quite good at school, you invariably are shoehorned into, you should be a vet. And I guess that started me off on my professional journey, was actually studying veterinary medicine at Edinburgh. But I think what I didn't realize at the time was how limited a profession it is. I mean, it is very much structured around the domestic animals that have some form of value to humans, and therefore can contribute in an economic sense and justify medical interventions. And I was in many ways very frustrated, actually, in practice, with aspects of that. And although I found a role as a wildlife vet, I was working for 4 years exclusively doing that with the RSPCA in the UK. A lot of the animals I was actually seeing, I was just dealing with the presenting problem, and the underlying problems that have given rise to those presentations, you just don't touch. So when you're seeing oil birds, for example, who are coming in off the beaches after an oil spill at sea, the effort goes into trying to save as many of those as possible, and obviously those that can't be saved are humanely euthanized. And that is a good in itself, but the underlying problem is that we've got a lot of oil being spilled at sea and ending up on the beaches, and that has a devastating effect on those ecosystems. And I think this is just one example of many thousands of health problems that we have in the world, and that affect not just humans and their animals, not just our wildlife, but the wider ecosystem. And our awareness of those is very, very limited. So I think in exploring that, I moved away from the intervention, the sort of the traditional veterinary model of looking after wildlife and indeed domestic animal patients, and into trying to develop a more holistic approach to health and welfare concerns.
Okay.
I guess that took me back into education, because I basically had a lot of stuff to unlearn. I've learned a lot of the wrong things at vet school, and I had a lot of things to unlearn and unlearn, not just about the subject matter, but also about myself. Actually, there was a lot of exploration or self-exploration that was required to understand, how the world is constructed, but also how I, as an individual, construct my own world and my own worldview, and how others do that. That kind of brought me to the fork in the road where I retrained in education, and specifically in experiential education. So I do a lot of outdoor and environmental education, which for me was an opportunity to spend a lot more time outside, and particularly to engage in guiding. And that meant that I started working a lot more within the tourism sector, so particularly mountain tourism. And as an international mountaineer, I ended up working in the guide school in Morocco, where mountain guides have been trained since the 80s. And my contribution there was very much on animal welfare in the first instance, but also on integrating many aspects of professional practice on expeditions. So I was there with the guides, doing every year we would do a crossing of the High Atlas, sort of 15-day trek, which was grueling because they were all very good athletes, I have to say, and I'm very keen to learn, but it was hard keeping up with them, I have to say. But it meant that set up a really good platform for what became my PhD, which was actually looking at animal welfare within the mountain tourism industry, and just how little understanding there actually is of the mules who do a lot of the work, carrying luggage, carrying people, not just in Morocco. I mean, this is a worldwide industry. So that became my doctoral study program, which took up probably 10 years of my life, actually. Right. And involved also a move from working in the School of Education to working in the School of Human Geography. So I've kind of moved disciplines a lot, and I guess this is where we met up, Vanessa. Is that one of the things I really drew a lot on to help people see what was in front of them, but that they weren't seeing was still photography and video, and so that was integrated into the approach I took to helping people see more deeply and develop better understandings of and insight and awareness of the mule and of mule welfare. So that took me up to the end of 2017, and on finishing that PhD, I found myself by some circuitous route back at the vet school where I'd started in the early 90s, and they were needing a coordinator for two of their holistic health programs. So one is called One Health, and this seeks to train all healthcare professionals in holistic approaches that integrate human, animal, and environmental health. And the other is specifically aimed at vets wanting to work in conservation, and that's conservation medicine. So I coordinate those two postgraduate programs, and that's where I am now.
Okay. Well, thanks. It sounds really fascinating journey. As you said, you've kind of gone round in a circle to some degree. As you say,
which is great systems thinking.
I mean, the Atlas Mountains things. I mean, I when I was in Morocco, I went up to the Atlas Mountains. I remember being thrown. Literally, I was thrown up the mountain by this guide in flip-flops. He was a local guide, and he was literally. I wasn't in flip-flops. I was in these Timberland sandals that were kind of had heels on, but that was another story. And he had flip-flops, and he was just throwing me up the mountains. And it's an absolutely beautiful place, but you do really get a sense of the terrain, and like you said, they're fit. These guys are really fit. So yeah, anyway, What got you interested in the natural world in the first place? I mean, you touched on the fact that when you were younger, that, you know, and animals and things. I mean, can you talk a little bit about?
It's a good question, and I think we'll all be able to relate to this through our own childhood experiences and an awareness of what really resonated at a deep level. So for me, much of my childhood was spent either in the southwest of England in Bristol, or back home in France on holiday. So we would spend most of our summers in France, and I was always, from a very, very young age, in the garden, outside, really curious about any creepy crawly that I could find. And very early on, I guess I was climbing and exploring and fascinated by birds particularly.
Yeah.
And was very active in the Scouts as well, and I think that helped. So I think, as a cabin and a Scout, I pursued a lot of those interests. So the signs were there from a very early age, and I think when you're aware of your energy, it's then a question of matching it up with opportunities and trying to work out, how to find that match between, what you're interested in, what you care about, what you're good at, and what the world wants of you. So it's that intersection between the potential you carry and the potential the world has for you. And I guess in my own case, and this might make you smile, because I see now why I can relate to mules. So for me, I've got a stubborn streak as well. So when I went for my interview at Edinburgh, I was told, nobody's ever going to pay for a blackbird to be treated. And this was, in 1990, I probably had the interview. And in 1999, there I was getting a job with the RSPCA and treating blackbirds. So I probably am quite persistent and quite good at proving people wrong in the long term. But I think that reflects that reflects what you're carrying inside, and I think a lot of your readers will probably be able to relate to that in their own ways, really.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. It's good to be stubborn. Sometimes it really is good to be stubborn. You get what you want in the end, or you get the best outcome. Obviously, part of the Journal of Biophilic Design is exploring our connection with nature and how it benefits us and how we relate to it, and how we interact with nature. I just wanted to just touch on you, and we're going to have another podcast on this, but you're writing a book which I find really interesting, on an ecological pilgrimage, and the Way of St Cuthbert. Can you tell people who maybe don't know what the Way of St Cuthbert is? I mean, it's a journey, it's a route.
So it's a great question, and thank you very much for raising it. In answering your question, I think I want to highlight that, or emphasize that the Way is one of our long distance paths in the UK. It's probably our best known pilgrimage route, but it also, metaphorically speaking, is a way of carrying oneself, a way of attending to the world and of being in the world. So the book I've been working on, and that's now finished and is due for release, hopefully very soon, explores the route that runs between Melrose and the Scottish borders and Holy Island, also known as Lindisfarne in Northumberland on the coast, and does so in a very slow and considered and attentive way that actually emphasizes the kind of things that can actually bring us into the present moment and can allow us to connect to ourselves, to maybe those we're traveling with if we're not alone, but most especially to the natural world. And I think one of the really exciting things about St Cuthbert, in whose name this trail has been created, and that actually links a lot of the sites that marked his own life, is that he's probably one of the earliest conservationists. So he's somebody who had an instinct for protecting wildlife, and one of the National Trust's great reserves in the UK are the Farne Islands, which is where he ended his life. And he is associated with the eider duck, and in those parts the eider duck is often called the cuddy duck, so cuddy from Cuthbert. And he is supposed to have had this very deep connection to that particular bird. And when you actually visit the Farne Islands and you're actually seeing how tolerant the female eider is when she's on her nest of humans, you know, it feels like an immense privilege. And to have had him actually ensuring that those visiting the islands actually respected the wildlife there, I think, you know, it's in many ways just sowing the seeds of you know, the idea of preserving some of these last relics of the wild places we still have in the UK. I mean, and you know, his life was marked by lots of examples of deep connection to nature. So one of the more famous ones is of him actually going into the sea, which was one of his ways of becoming more present. You know, it was a cold immersion, and I think now we talk about that in terms of wild water swimming and the value for our mental health. But he was aware that it had value. But he is reported to have been dried off by two otters who came up to him on the beach and actually just rubbed themselves against him. And I think what's nice about that kind of story is that there are people in the world who animals, whether wild or domestic, can read, and they realize that they are not a threat. And those people seem to attract animals to them very, very easily. Just the other day, you know, the snow had fallen, and I was out photographing wrens, and I'm not joking, one of these little wrens allowed me within a foot of her, and she was hunting spiders, and I actually managed to get, it's not the best picture, but I'm quite pleased that I can actually see this tiny little spider that she has caught in her bill. And if you can think of how small the wren is, and therefore how small the spider is, and she was quite happy to, you know, let me do that. You know, it was because I guess I was really respectful of her, very quiet. I was just allowing it to happen. And this is something that I think St. Cuthbert was almost certainly very, very good at. And it characterizes the attitude he brought to life and his ability to transcend differences. So yeah, it's a great legacy to explore, and it's one that I would encourage anybody interested in walking and in exploring the border country between Scotland and England to embrace. Yeah.
That's lovely. I was aware of St. Cuthbert Way, but I you know, having talked to you and obviously, you know, read about it a little bit, I'm fascinated. I love long distance walking. I've done the West Highland Way and Hadrian's Wall and other things, but I haven't done that yet, and I didn't have the guts to go across to Lindisfarne when I was up there before, when I was up there on business. I was going up to Edinburgh because I wasn't sure if the water was going to come in or not, and I didn't trust the communication that I had. So but I will do it one day. And it's lovely what you say about some people, and I think we all have it. It's probably maybe we tuned out of it, or we're, you know, we could be too fast in our lives. I mean, as you say, this whole lockdown, people are treating life and themselves in a different way. They're more respectful to themselves and to their environment, and they're also observing nature in a more appreciative way. I mean, I've got squirrels and birds. I've got loads of birds out there, and I was doing some filming just because I'm doing these mindful moment things. And I just didn't realize how many different birds I had outside. It was just bonkers. But I go out there and I speak to the squirrel, and it doesn't move. You know, I kind of go, I'm just giving you some food, and it just sort of sits there and waits, and, you know, doesn't run off now. So yeah, it's just nice to commune. It's nice to commune with nature. And sort of leading on from that, your PhD in human geography, which you mentioned, is sort of, it sort of explores the sort of complexities of human behavior change for one, animal welfare within sort of international mountain tourism industry. But sort of going on from that, and obviously the book that you're writing and your appreciation of the human connection with nature and animals in particular. I mean, how do you see the benefits of, or can we learn anything from your findings in how we might apply that to our lives now, and also, you know, and also the custodianship of our planet, but kind of like, just, you know, what sort of takeaways could you maybe share with our audience?
I mean, two things come to me. I think the first is a very practical one, and that's that a lot of our relationships are characterized by an unequal distribution of power, and often we are unaware of how we are holding that power and often abusing that power. So we see it in relationships, you know, particularly between men and women, for example. And that's why feminist care theory has really started to shake up a lot of the ways we think about equality, diversity, and inclusivity. This year and last, I think we're seeing it, but very much with regard to the race question. So I think we're becoming more aware of, you know, the post-colonial issues that our world really needs to, you know, to get to grips with. And I think specifically with regard to working equines, so horses and mules and donkeys, there has historically been a reliance on equipment, and particularly bits that are very, very painful. And so that reliance means that a relationship based on control and on fear predominate. And often, you know, the communities who draw on this, you know, haven't even had no opportunity to explore the alternatives. So then they're not aware of what a more respectful relationship feels like. And that respectful relationship is based much more on sort of, you know, more concepts of mutuality and reciprocity, but therefore of listening. And it's this willingness to listen to the other and to explore less controlling ways of relating that I think came out of my PhD. I think the second thing that I would mention there, and it's relevant to listening, is that in biology and philosophy now, the concept of the self, so this idea that there are individuals, you know, has been blown out of the water. You know, we know that we are deeply connected, so you can't define yourself without also defining yourself in relation to others, in relation to your environment. You know, if we think about ourselves, you know, we've got a gut biome. You know, we've got more cells in us that we would identify as non-self than self, and yet, you know, that they contribute to how we think, how we feel. And there are countless examples of just how much of an extended self we actually have. And this means that within biology and within philosophy, and particularly within the social sciences, we can start exploring ideas of becoming with. So it's this idea that we can become mule, we can become cat, we can become bird, because this potential we carry within us to understand the other and to integrate that understanding and that awareness into who we are, can actually inform how we then behave in the world. And where it's very relevant to environmental education is that children, when they are exploring the world, they actually just automatically assimilate, you know, that connection with, you know, with nature into their identities. And it's something that modern society, with its indoor life and its emphasis on the digital world, has shut off. So for me, what this is all about is actually opening back up those opportunities so that we can realize more of the potentials that we carry within us, and become much more community oriented. And it is a community project in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And how would we do that? I mean, what sort of steps would people do if they were in their community, for instance? What would you what would be the first step for somebody to kind of re-engage in that way?
I'm definitely not prescriptive in this, and I think it comes down very much to what sort of person you are. So if you're somebody who dances, all you've got to do is watch 2 tango dances to realize what good listening might entail. The same is true of great musicians, and there are moments when you see people playing together, but particularly improvising together, and the quality of listening is incredible. Yeah. When you see a horse and rider who can work together without any form of control, and where the communication is just based on the subtlest of signs, so maybe changes in the seat position, or changes in the voice, you start to realize what is actually possible. And you'll see this on the sports field, where that understanding is present, and people are reading what is there to be read, and there's almost this sixth sense there that is actually about anticipation, but it's therefore future oriented. And I think where it's getting really exciting is that when we talk about communities of change, so whether this be communities of practice or communities of learning, particularly communities of change, when communities come together and they talk about the world that they've currently got, which nobody is really happy with because it's characterized by so many of those power abuses, and compare that with the world that they really want, they start to realize where they can make those changes. And we're seeing that now in community-led responses to climate change, where people are empowering themselves to make very significant changes. So at whatever level we're talking at, it is possible, and I think that empowerment is the source of a lot of hope for the future, at a time when we really need it as well, because we're confronted on a daily basis with a whole load of crises, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be the climate crises, or the collapse in global biodiversity. It's at a global level, these are huge challenges. And I guess my last point would be, in medicine, all the health challenges we face are immense and require a collaborative approach. So the need for that community approach, the need for people to work together across disciplines, and also with local communities, is bigger than it's ever been.
Because we can learn so much from each other, can't we? Everybody has different backgrounds, different experience and stuff. And as you say, if you have patience and you can listen, you have empathy, and you open your heart and open your mind, your life can be so much richer, and the planet can be so much richer in many ways. In one of your articles on the Teaching Matters blog on the Edinburgh University, and I'll put the link on our website, you quote Rumi from the guest house, and you show a photograph that you've taken of tree roots that have overtaken and surrounding and maybe even embracing this old human house. I mean, obviously you selected that image for a reason. Can you explain what that means to you, and what can we learn from it?
There's lots of things coming to me. So when I took that photograph, I was having quite a sort of dark day, actually, and I was very despondent with things. And I'll confess, I'd gone to a particular area with Kirsty, my partner, to go for a walk, and was really frustrated by the crowds, and just I was just thinking, the weather's poor, the lights poor, there's too many people around. And I drove back up the hill, and I just pulled into a lay-by and decided I was going to explore a particular area of woodland that I'd never been in. And I just took the path less traveled and explored a faint path into the woods, and about 20 minutes later stumbled on this old ruin. And the fascinating thing about the ruin was that it was no longer clear who was supporting who, whether the tree was breaking down the ruin or holding the ruin up. The tree as well was showing her roots, and I always try and use a gender rather than the word it when talking about life, sort of non-human entities, which is why I'm saying her, because in French, for example, we say l'arbre, so the tree. Sorry, I'm wrong actually. In French, it's un arbre, not une arbre. So it's. I'm going to have to go and double check that actually. But anyway, whether it's a male or a female, it comes down maybe to character. Yeah. So we can come back to that. Maybe it's not important as long as we have respect for the tree. Yeah. But what I was really struck by there was the extent of the roots that could be seen. And it was almost no longer possible to tell what was a branch and what was a root. So that was I guess what was happening at the time. And I think as I was thinking about the image, and I'm thinking about it metaphorically in particular afterwards, this idea of the common root etymologically between human and humus, between this idea that we are all compost at the end of the day. When people talk about ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we are going back. We're formed of organic matter, and that matter is in constant circulation. So the structure of our hand will be completely different in a few weeks' time than it is today. And I was just struck by different elements of time there, because this house was no longer a house and yet was welcoming in life, was in many ways rewilding itself. So because it's a house, I'm going to use it. So I'm a real pain with my students over this. And yes, I think the reason I found meaning in Rumi's words were this idea that a guest house is actually about the welcome we extend, and that ability to welcome whoever comes to cast their shadow on our doorstep. And we often don't know what gifts they are actually bringing. So there was a lot of sort of deeper sort of philosophical and metaphorical meaning in the image and in the experience. To turn it into quite a good day, actually.
It's a beautiful image, and it evoked lots of feelings and emotions and responses within me as well. So thanks for sharing that as well, and thanks for sharing your insight. I mean, obviously you've mentioned you explore the sort of complex field of conservation medicine, and from a unique angle, sort of inspiring new ways of thinking about the roles that veterinarians and other professionals can play in the field. I mean, can you explain what sort of conservation medicine is, and really kind of what that means to you?
So I think for vets who are wanting to work in conservation, one of the things that often holds them back is a limited understanding of what their contribution might be. And historically, I think vets often think of themselves as diagnosticians and people who then work with a diagnosis to apply a treatment. However, when we start working at a population level and indeed beyond that at an ecosystem level, it's really unclear who the patient actually is, because we're no longer just focusing on individuals. We're no longer just focusing on groups of individuals. We're actually focusing on the individual and those groups of individuals within a ecological system. And this really challenges us to think about, well, what does it mean to be healthy? Mm-hmm. And where do we draw those lines, and how artificial are those lines? Mm. And I think particularly when we look at the anthropogenic health challenges we see everywhere in the world today. So all of those health problems that humans are causing, either because of the pollution that we're causing, either because of global warming, changes in sea temperature, changes in food availability, changes in behavior as well of animals, changes in consumption patterns. The impact we have is immense. Before Rachel Carson's work, The Silent Spring, came out, I think our awareness of the impact of a lot of these hidden human effects, whether it be lead or chemicals, was really negligible. And I think we're now in living through a period where we're more open to them, and yet we're still only just realizing the damage that plastic is causing. For example, we're only starting to realize the impact that a lot of the treatments we use have. So the use of antimicrobials, the use of herbicides, the use of pesticides. Within the last year or two, vets, so domestic animal vets, are starting to question whether they should actually be routinely using flea treatments on dogs and cats, because those have an effect on the environment. They're washed off and can find themselves in the environment, and therefore have an impact on wildlife and on ecosystems. And if we think about the wormers that get used, I mean, one of the things I was seeing in Morocco, in the areas where certain animal welfare charities were working, was that they'd be worming routinely the mules working there, and you saw no dung beetles in the area. So the dung beetle population had been decimated. And in the UK, that's one of our big conservation issues, is that we've decimated the dung beetle population on all our farms. A lot of the beetles that should exist on our farms and indeed elsewhere, have been decimated, and we're still not fully aware of that. So we're, I guess, coming back to the health question, I think we need to become much more subtle, much more targeted. These sledgehammer treatments are often way too blunt. So we also need to be educating owners more about the appropriateness of treatments. And there's a lot of work still to do. So I see this as being a long-term project, and one that all professionals can actually contribute to, because the world needs it. It's we're creating problems rather than solving them in many ways, and that's something we've got to develop an ability to deal with. So it's about responsibility for me, or the creation of responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, just sort of picking up on what you say about the, what we inoculate, or what we give our animals, in order for them to, survive in an environment. Well, we think we do. Actually, when you do, it doesn't need a rethink. I mean, it's part of the photo aid stuff work that I was doing when I was out in Uganda, and I was with the nomadic people. So there's the PENHA, Pastoralist and Environmental Network in the Horn of Africa. They work with groups. And what the government's there is saying, you've got to be, you mustn't move around anymore. You've got to be sedentary. You've got to stay. And because their love is the Ankoli cows, the ones with the big horns, and they're suited for the environment. And because what they're trying to make them do is, and what a lot of them are doing now, is they're having Frisian cows. And you can imagine, I mean, Frisian cows by nature comes from Europe, not suited particularly for potentially an African environment where the heat is so, obviously they have to inject them with like loads and loads of stuff. The thing is, when you go out there in those people, the children, because they had like, you know, traditional Ankoli cow milk, they're really fit. They're really fit. It's organic milk, it's organic produce, because there's no injections in there or anything like that. Okay, there's other economic issues, which, you know, that's another point, but actually that was kind of sustainable with what they were doing. But by now trying to make them have a different way of farming and having a living, they're going to cause another problem. I think I don't, you know, it's just, you know, you're seeing that happen in a country which has potential to grow. But anyway, it's also a political issue, presumably, going on there too. Like everywhere is, this must be a money issue.
And I think it's an issue of colonialism in science and indeed in healthcare. I think it's very easy to export an answer that might be appropriate in one part of the world to another part of the world, without realizing that actually the problem is constituted in situ. So the challenges that we face in any one part of the world will have, you know, its own local elements.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be aware of, you know, that complexity, and also be, you know, view ourselves as facilitators rather than as, you know, the people who are going to solve the problem. And, you know, it's
it's great.
I think we're seeing it in Tanzania at the moment with the, you know, the response of the government, from what I've understood in the press. I may have got this wrong, but my understanding is their resistance to vaccines is because a lot of the suspicions around, you know, Western approaches, and, you know, in many ways we're responsible for that, because if we've not built that trust, you know, we you know, don't have, you know, the sort of dialogical respectful possibilities in place that allow us to share useful solutions. You know, and it's going to be very sad if they you know, radically refuse the possibility of vaccines. But if their reality is that they've often been abused by developed countries, then that's their reality, and we need to try and understand that and not sort of paint it as some strange response, because I think there's more there at a, you know, at a sociological level going on.
Yeah,
Sociological.
Yeah. I mean, it's just another thing that I read in the, you know, recently as well, is that the bees, the government has just signed this agreement to allow this particular pesticide to be used on the crops, which is harmful to the bees. I mean, I know I don't want to go into politics. I'm trying to keep it neutral, but it does make you question who their advisors are or what their agenda is, because without bees we don't have a lot of stuff. You know, I don't quite understand where they're coming at with that, apart from the fact that it's going to produce crops quicker, and so therefore the Brexit thing won't be, you know, the solution won't be needed, because we'll be importing stuff. We won't need to import stuff or export stuff. We'll be growing extra crops in this country. I mean, I have no idea what their rationale is for that.
And I think a lot of it would be because the decisions are made, you know, in a short-term cycle and not in a long-term cycle, and that's part of that is because you know, the way our politicians are elected, you know, they're there for short periods of time, and also because of the power of certain parts of the electorate. So I think farming has historically been a traditional sector, and might not be particularly open to you know, the radical rethinking that's needed of agriculture if we're to move away from an industrial model of production. I think, you know, we're seeing that with land management issues across the UK, you know, whether it's with regard to reforesting the uplands, with regard to understanding what carbon capture, you know, is needed, not just across the UK, but globally. You know, I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen pretty fast, but our past experiences are determining very much, you know, what to do next. Whereas, you know, we also really need to be paying attention to what the future needs, not what the past has taught us, because the past is not a predictor of the future, or its ability to predict the future is very limited.
Yeah, I'll send you afterwards. There's a link. I wrote a piece about. There was a farmer in the FT. He wrote an article about, you know, obviously how things have changed for him, and how, I mean, there's obviously this whole move for rewilding, but he made the point, you know, it's a lot easier to be a rewilding farmer than it is to be a traditional farmer in a way, because the animals move around and sort of almost, you know, not self-care, but it's you know, it's a healthier way for them, obviously, because they're building their muscles up and everything else. So I'll send you a link afterwards. In one of the articles that you've written for the University of Edinburgh, you've written, it's embedding systems thinking and sustainability and transdisciplinary thinking, teaching and learning. You discuss human ecosystems versus ecosystems, which is what you've been talking about really here. And I have to quote you here. It says, the future of education, it's increasingly recognized, lies in fostering ecosystem awareness and self-realization, higher level proficiencies that can be realized through developing our abilities as listeners and as members of a community, a woodland community perhaps, whose symphonies are rich because every part contributes more fully. And you touched earlier about how, you know, we should nurture that ability as being listeners. I mean, can you describe your vision a little bit more detail? And you mentioned particularly slowing down. I mean, how can fostering a relationship with nature help us be better human beings and yeah, be better human beings really, and respect our natural world?
I think there's sort of two parts to your question there. I guess in terms of moving away from an ecosystem view of the world and towards a more ecosystem view of the world, you know, this is possible both at the individual level but also at the group level. The key shift that's happening is that our source of attention moves outside of ourselves. So we all have this tendency often to listen, not to what is happening outside of ourselves, to what other people are saying, but to what we're wanting to say, you know, in reaction to the situation. And so we're not actually listening. You know, we're very much centered deep within ourselves, and we're not paying attention to all of the stuff that's going on around us. And that's relevant to our ability to be able to pick up on information that actually is you know, is disconfirming data. So it actually tells us that our view of the world is actually needing to be adjusted. You know, it's not correct. You know, that dirty look that somebody has given you is not actually because you're a terrible person or because you've upset them. You know, there's something else going on and you haven't got the information to evaluate the situation. So moving to paying attention to the outside world, you know, is the key thing, and curiosity allows us to really actually do that. And in my work, one of the key things there is to realize that when you see a fear response from an animal or from a human being, there's something else you need to find out. You need to find out why they're fearful, because fear is one of these corrosive emotions that never brings out the best in people. You know, if we want to bring out the best in people, we've got to move beyond fear. So paying attention to these things allows us to widen our awareness. And then when we actually start empathizing with them, and empathizing in the sense that we start walking in their shoes, and we actually view them as a sacred other, means that our source of attention has actually shifted completely from within ourselves to within them, and we're suddenly starting to understand their life world. And having done that, whatever we then say or do afterwards will have benefited from that awareness, because we're suddenly aware of somebody who we might have previously have strongly disapproved of or strongly disliked. We're suddenly seeing them as a real person, and this doesn't have to be a human person. This could be an other than human person. It could be the mule that's just kicked you, for example, which for me is a great example. But and I think the thing that certainly in my work is really exciting is that once we're developing that ability to empathize and to listen empathically, and to bring that in, we're able to engage in dialogue. But when we actually slow ourselves down on top of that, and we actually calm down and see what the future is calling for, so see what is needed in response to the whole, what we're dealing with as a collective, our ability to tap into generative possibilities and actually be creative and realize possibilities that previously we wouldn't even have imagined materializes, and becomes available to us. And this is crucial for finding ways through a lot of the complexity that we face today, which has a lot of uncertainty around it. I think when I teach around this, I emphasize that the kind of complexity we're talking about is emergent. It's a form of complexity that is characterized by an incomplete problem statement, a lack of awareness of who's involved, because I think, as we were talking about earlier, we often overlook, amongst other entities, insects and trees and and women. So there are at least those two elements that characterize emergent complexity. And I guess it allows us to, so where I've taken this is I've taken this into spaces where we're asking professionals from different disciplines to work together on complex health challenges, but then also to work with other stakeholders who may be members of the community, who may be people who themselves have a vested interest in the health challenge. And that has the potential to deliver much better problem statements and much better ways of trying to work with that problem statement and evolve it such that our responses have more potential to actually be sustainable. I think a lot of us will have seen technical people brought in to solve a problem, and then a year down the road you realize that what they'd suggested as an answer to the problem has been abandoned because the problem statement was incomplete and it's not actually the real problem, or there are things that have been overlooked. And I think that's a characteristic, I think, of a lot of the challenges that we need to respond to, is that we've got to invest a lot in this capacity building so that we're better able to respond to these challenges.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that captured. I find it really hard to kind of capture, what it means and why this shift from the ego to the eco is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing about the interdisciplinary thing that you mentioned, and I think that's a fundamental key to unlocking understanding and listening and everything else, because everybody has something different to say. Just a sort of bit of background, the Journal of Biophilic Design is interdisciplinary for that very reason. We've got, so yourself, you're with a really interesting background from veterinary to, the sort of human science type thing and geography and everything else. We've got gardeners, forest walkers, we have interior designers and architects and change managers, and because everybody has something different to bring about our relationship to nature and the natural world and how it benefits us. I mean, I started this initially because of seeing how views made an impact in healthcare. It was a very personal situation that I was going in and my family. And that was my impetus for setting up Argenta Wellness, who is the main company behind the Journal of Biophilic Design. And I think it's just really important. So, and I really, really appreciate your time here, Glen. And I thanks very much. I really look forward to speaking with you again. As a kind of sort of final word, really, if you could brush the world with sort of biophilia, with like the sort of appreciation of life, of living things, I mean, what would the world look like? What would it be for you?
Well, the thing that's coming to me at the moment is something about normalizing these things so that they're more accessible, and that we pay the attention to them that they deserve. So it should be acceptable to go for a walk, for a meeting.
Yeah.
It should be much easier for people to actually take an extended lunch break and actually get some contact with nature. Healthcare situations should have windows looking out onto green spaces. All our communities should have access to rich woodland, and that should be part of our urban planning. School children should actually have much more time devoted to outdoor activities, and I think for me this is about access and about availability and about just saying, well, these are rights that people have and that shouldn't be denied. So I guess for me it comes down to normalizing this so that we integrate it into a well-being economy, into a well-being lifestyle, a well-being approach to family, community, work, everything.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.